Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of the Ozarks. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this narration. We're interested in knowing what places and what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. In the autumn of 1892, when the dense forests of the Ozark Mountains were ablaze with fall colors, a series of disappearances began to plague the logging communities scattered throughout the remote hills of southern Missouri. The Ozarks, with their isolated hollows and mist-shrouded ridges, had always harbored secrets. The region itself, an ancient highland plateau carved by countless rivers and streams into a labyrinth of deep valleys, hidden caves, and forested ridges, seemed designed to conceal. Local authorities initially dismissed these disappearances as common occurrences in a region where transient workers moved from camp to camp following the seasonal cutting. What no one could have anticipated was that these routine disappearances would eventually lead to the discovery of what many consider one of the most disturbing cases in American history, a case that would cast a long shadow over the region for generations to come. The Hawkins brothers, Elijah and Isaiah, operated a remote lodging house and eatery known as the Woodsman's Rest, approximately 17 miles northeast of the settlement of Winona, Missouri, along an unnamed logging trail that has since been reclaimed by the forest. The establishment stood in a small clearing near the convergence of two seasonal creeks, positioned strategically to serve the needs of travelers moving between the scattered logging operations throughout Shannon County. County records describe the establishment as a two-story wooden structure with attached cooking facilities and stabling for 8 horses, built in 1887 with funds the brothers had supposedly saved from years of work in the mining operations, further north in the lead belt around Bonne Terre. The property itself, according to land office records preserved in the county courthouse, encompassed nearly 40 acres of dense woodland and included a small creek that provided fresh water year-round. The original deed, filed under Elijah Hawkins' name and witnessed by County Clerk Thaddeus Wilson, indicates the brothers purchased the land for a surprisingly modest sum from a widow named Agnes Caldwell, whose husband had attempted unsuccessfully to establish a homestead there some years earlier. Local rumor, documented decades later in oral histories, suggested that the land was sold cheaply because Caldwell believed it to be troubled ground, where crops refused to flourish and livestock grew inexplicably nervous. The Woodsman's Rest quickly gained a reputation among the itinerant workforce of the region. Unlike many rustic accommodations available to loggers and travelers, the Hawkins establishment offered not just shelter, but notably comfortable beds, reliable hot meals, and what one frequent guest described in a letter home as a surprising degree of refinement for so remote a location. The brothers maintained a selection of newspapers from St. Louis and even Springfield, delivered weekly by mail coach, and Elijah was known to conduct impromptu reading sessions in the evenings for those guests who expressed interest. According to the Springfield Republican newspaper, dated October 18, 1892, the first officially recorded disappearance connected to the case was that of a 31-year-old lumber foreman named Thomas Grayson. Grayson had been employed by the Missouri Timber Company for nearly 7 years and was known for his reliability and strict record-keeping. His immediate supervisor, James Whitaker, would later testify that Grayson had been dispatched to inspect cutting operations in 3 separate locations, with instructions to document the progress and labor requirements at each site. When he failed to return from the inspection of the cutting operations near what was then called Black Hollow, his absence was noted within days. His company ledger was found abandoned at the Woodsman's Rest, where he had reportedly taken a meal before continuing his journey. The ledger itself becomes a crucial piece of evidence in this case. Preserved in the Missouri State Historical Society archives, its final entry, dated October 12, 1892, reads, "Stopping at Hawkins' place. Good meal, strange taste of the venison, moving on to Holocite by nightfall. The handwriting in this entry, according to experts who examined it in 1954, shows no signs of distress or hurry. Grayson apparently had no inkling of what would soon befall him. An additional detail, noted by the examining expert, Dr. Harold Mansfield, was that the ink used for this final entry appeared slightly different in composition from that used in previous entries, suggesting it might have been written with a different pen, possibly one provided by the establishment. Grayson's disappearance initially caused little concern beyond his immediate employers. The Missouri Timber Company filed a routine report with the county sheriff's office, but as company director William Barton noted in a letter to Grayson's parents, dated November 3, 1892, such absences, while unfortunate, are not uncommon in our industry. Men often find better opportunities elsewhere, or simply decide the work is not to their liking and depart without formal notice. This dismissive attitude reflects the transient nature of the workforce and the limited institutional concern for individual laborers that characterized the era. By December of that same year, 3 more lumberjacks had vanished from the same general area. Jacob Miller, age 28, was reported missing by his cutting crew on November 3rd when he failed to return from a supply run to the nearest general store in Winona. Silas Thornton, 42, and Frederick Walsh, 35, disappeared while traveling together between camps around the first week of December, according to sparse records kept by their employer. Each had been last seen either heading toward or leaving from the Hawkins brothers' establishment, yet no formal investigation was launched. The winter was harsh, and as one local official noted in correspondence preserved in the Shannon County archives, men go missing in these hills every season. The forest claims its due. This fatalistic acceptance of disappearances reveals much about life in the remote regions of the Ozarks at the close of the 19th century. The combination of dangerous work, harsh environmental conditions, and minimal record-keeping created a perfect environment where individuals could vanish without triggering significant alarm. For transient workers, particularly those without family connections in the immediate area, there were few advocates to press for thorough investigations when they went missing. What makes this case particularly disturbing is not just the disappearances themselves, but what local resident Martha Carver described in her personal journal uncovered during a courthouse restoration in 1954. Carver, a widow who supported herself by supplying eggs, milk, and occasionally vegetables to various establishments in the area, noted with curious detail how the Hawkins establishment had begun to gain a reputation for its uncommonly flavorful stews and meat so tender it falls from the bone. Her journal entry from November 1892 reads, "Isaiah claims it's venison and wild boar, but I've never known such meat to have that peculiar sweetness." Whatever their method, folks travel miles for their Sunday servings. The brothers seem pleased with their growing reputation, though Isaiah rarely emerges from the kitchen these days. Carver's journal contains other observations that, in retrospect, seem ominous. She notes that the brothers had begun digging an expanded cellar in late summer, with Isaiah explaining they needed more space for preservation during the coming winter months. "They've lined it with stone," she wrote on August 30th, 1892, and installed a heavy oak door with an impressive iron lock. Isaiah mentioned something about special curing methods requiring consistent temperatures. He seems uncommonly protective of whatever process they've developed. She also records an incident in which she arrived earlier than expected for a delivery and found Elijah washing dark stains from the porch steps. He explained it as butchering day, though Carver noted there was no sign of animal remains in the usual places. No hide stretched to dry, she wrote, no offal for the dogs, and the usual scent of blood was masked by something else, pine tar perhaps, or some other strong-smelling substance. Elijah seemed uncharacteristically terse when I inquired about it. By early December, Carver's journal entries regarding the woodsman's rest take on a subtly different tone. "Delivered the usual this morning," she wrote on December 5th. "More guests than typical for this season. Elijah, particularly welcoming, insisted I stay for coffee." Isaiah watched from the kitchen door but did not join us. The meal they were preparing had a peculiar aroma, rich and savory, but with an underlying note I cannot place. Something in Elijah's manner made me decline when he offered a taste. For the first time, I felt uneasy in their company. The brothers themselves were not natives to the region. County records indicate they arrived in Missouri around 1885 from an unspecified location in Pennsylvania. The 1880 census shows no record of them in Pennsylvania under their names, suggesting either an error in record-keeping or a deliberate change of identity. They first appear in Missouri records when Elijah applied for a business license in Ironton, Iron County, approximately 80 miles northeast of their eventual location in Shannon County. The application, dated June 1885, listed their previous occupation as meat processing and preservation, though no specific employer was named. Descriptions from various accounts suggest they were physically similar, both standing over 6 feet tall, with thick beards and calm, measured speaking manners that some found unsettling. Elijah, the elder by 2 years, was reportedly the more sociable of the pair, handling the front of their establishment, while Isaiah remained primarily in the kitchen and storage areas. Those who interacted with them regularly described a curious dynamic between the brothers. Elijah spoke for both, often seeming to anticipate Isaiah's thoughts without verbal communication, while Isaiah deferred to his brother in all matters involving interaction with guests or suppliers. A tintype photograph, the only known image of the brothers, was taken in 1888 at a county fair in West Plains and now resides in the Missouri Historical Society collection. It shows 2 broad-shouldered men in dark suits standing stiffly before the camera. Their expressions are neutral, betraying nothing of their inner thoughts. Their physical similarity is striking, both with full beards and hair cut in the same fashion, distinguished primarily by a small scar visible on Elijah's left temple. Those who knew them described Elijah as smooth-spoken and educated beyond what you'd expect, while Isaiah was recalled as watchful and seldom speaking unless addressed directly. Samuel Layton, who operated a general store in Winona and supplied the brothers with various goods, provided one of the more detailed descriptions in a statement given to authorities in March 1893. The elder brother, Elijah, conducted all their business. He had refined manners and a persuasive way of speaking, almost like a preacher or professor, rather than a backwoods innkeeper. He kept detailed accounts and never disputed a bill. The younger one, Isaiah, rarely entered town. On the few occasions when he accompanied his brother, he remained silent and watched everyone with an intensity that made folks uncomfortable. There was something in his gaze that didn't sit right, as if he were appraising livestock rather than observing fellow humans. What happened during the winter of 1892-1893 might have remained buried in the mountains forever, if not for the arrival of William Blackwood, a private investigator hired by the family of Thomas Grayson. Blackwood, formerly a Pinkerton detective who had worked on several high-profile cases, including labor disputes in the coal regions of Pennsylvania, had established his own agency in St. Louis by 1890. The Grayson family, wealthy timber merchants from Springfield, had grown frustrated with the lack of official investigation into their son's disappearance and engaged Blackwood at considerable expense to determine his fate. Thomas Grayson's father, Jeremiah Grayson, was a prominent businessman with connections to both the timber industry and state politics. His influence likely played a significant role in initiating the investigation that local authorities had deemed unnecessary. A letter from Jeremiah to Blackwood, dated January 15, 1893, and preserved in the Historical Society archives, states, "Cost is no object in this matter. My son was not the type to abandon his responsibilities without word. Something happened to him, and I require answers that the local authorities seem unwilling or unable to provide. Blackwood's notes, partially preserved in the Missouri Historical Society collection, detail his meticulous approach to the investigation. He began in Winona, interviewing those who had last seen Grayson, before gradually working his way through the scattered logging camps and isolated homesteads of the region. His methodology was systematic and thorough, characteristics that had distinguished his work with the Pinkertons and that would prove crucial in unraveling the mystery of the Ozark disappearances. Multiple witnesses recalled seeing Grayson at the Woodsman's Rest, leading Blackwood to take lodging there himself in February 1893, presenting himself as a land surveyor considering new timber tracts for purchase. Arrived at the Hawkins establishment shortly before dusk, he wrote on February 14th. The location is remarkably isolated, accessible only by a narrow trail that would be easily missed without specific directions. The structure itself is larger and better constructed than one might expect given the remote setting, 2 full stories with a covered porch and separate stable building. The elder Hawkins, Elijah, greeted me with apparent warmth, though I note a certain calculation in his assessment of my person and belongings. The younger brother, Isaiah, made only a brief appearance before returning to what I assume are kitchen duties. Dinner was served promptly at 7 o'clock, a stew of remarkable richness which Elijah identified as venison with wild roots and herbs. There are 4 other guests at present, all connected to the timber operations in the area. Conversation at dinner was limited and perfunctory. I detected no obvious signs of suspicion regarding my presence or stated purpose. The brothers maintained separate quarters behind the kitchen, he wrote in his journal on February 15th. The cellar door remains locked at all times. When asked about additional storage, Elijah became noticeably agitated, claiming the foundation was unstable and unsafe for guests. There is a peculiar odor in certain parts of the structure, particularly near the rear stairwell, which Elijah attributes to a dead animal trapped in the walls. I remain unconvinced. Blackwood's investigative technique involved careful observation of routine and deviations from it. He noted the brothers' schedules, their interactions with guests, and the operation of the establishment with the practiced eye of someone accustomed to detecting inconsistencies. Isaiah rises before dawn each day, he recorded on February 17th. From my window, I have observed him visiting the smokehouse at approximately 4:30 a.m., carrying covered containers from the cellar. The process appears to involve some form of curing or preservation, though the quantity seems excessive for the number of guests currently in residence. He also documented the comings and goings of guests, noting with interest that while some departed as expected, others seemed to vanish without the customary rituals of departure. No settling of accounts with Elijah, no retrieval of horses from the stable, no farewells to fellow travelers. The logger who occupied the room adjacent to mine for the past 3 nights, he wrote on February 19th, was present at dinner yesterday evening but absent at breakfast. His belongings remain in his room, but Elijah explained that he had departed early for an urgent matter at one of the cutting sites. The man's horse, however, remains in the stable. Blackwood's investigation took a disturbing turn when he observed Isaiah Hawkins returning before dawn with what appeared to be blood-stained clothing. His entry from February 20th reads, "Awakened at approximately 3:15 a.m. by the sound of the rear door. Observed from my window I. Hawkins returning to the property. His jacket and hands appeared darkened with what I believe to be blood. He proceeded directly to the well, where he washed extensively before entering the kitchen. I note that a new guest arrived yesterday evening, a peddler by the name of Collins, who took dinner, but whose horse remains in the stable, while he himself is nowhere to be seen this morning." Later that same day, the brothers announced a special meal for their 7 lodgers, primarily lumberjacks waiting for the spring thaw to begin work again. Blackwood declined the meal, claiming illness, and instead observed the other men consuming what was described as a rich, dark stew with unusually tender meat. His notes include the disturbing detail that Elijah watched the men eat with an attentiveness that bordered on hunger itself, though he consumed nothing. The diners commented repeatedly on the exceptional quality of the meat, Blackwood wrote. One man joked that he had never tasted elk so fine, to which Elijah responded with a statement I find noteworthy. My brother has a gift for selecting only the finest specimens. The emphasis he placed on this declaration and the glance exchanged between the brothers struck me as significant, though I cannot yet articulate why. By morning, according to Blackwood's account, 3 of the men had fallen severely ill with symptoms consistent with poisoning, violent stomach pains, vomiting, and delirious fever. When questioned about its source, Elijah claimed it was elk, taken by his brother 2 days prior. When one of the affected men, in his delirium, accused the brothers of feeding us like they fed the others, Elijah Hawkins reportedly showed no reaction beyond offering more water. The calm with which E. Hawkins attended the afflicted men was unnatural, Blackwood observed. No sign of concern, no suggestion of sending for medical assistance, merely a patient observation of their suffering, as if recording the results of an experiment. Blackwood left the lodging house before dawn, ostensibly to seek medical help from the nearest settlement, but in reality to alert local authorities. His final entry, written hastily and dated February 21st, reads, "I am now convinced that the Hawkins brothers are responsible for the disappearances. What I observed last night confirms my suspicions regarding their activities. I believe they are not merely killing their victims, but processing them for consumption. God help us all if I am correct. I ride for Winona to alert the sheriff. Should I not return, let this journal serve as testimony to what I have witnessed." What followed has been pieced together from multiple sources, including court records, newspaper accounts from the West Plains Gazette and St. Louis Post-Dispatch, and oral histories collected by WPA workers in the 1930s. Blackwood reached Winona on February 22nd and immediately sought out Shannon County Sheriff James Thornton. Thornton, a veteran of the Civil War who had served as sheriff since 1888, was initially skeptical of Blackwood's claims. As he would later testify during the trial, the accusation seemed too fantastic to credit. In my 17 years of law enforcement, I had encountered murderers, thieves, and all manner of criminal behavior, but never anything approaching the depravity Mr. Blackwood described. Nevertheless, Thornton agreed to assemble a posse to investigate the claims. The delay in organizing this group, partly due to severe weather conditions, and partly due to Thornton's lingering skepticism, meant that the authorities did not arrive at the Woodsman's Rest until February 28, 1893, a full week after Blackwood had fled the establishment. Shannon County Sheriff James Thornton, along with 4 deputies, arrived at the Woodsman's Rest on February 28, 1893. According to the official report, they found the establishment empty of guests. Both brothers were present and denied any knowledge of Blackwood or his accusations. The initial search of the main floor and guest rooms revealed nothing immediately suspicious, though Deputy Michael Reardon noted in a separate statement that the entire structure had an unwholesome odor that seemed strongest near the kitchen area. The official report, filed on March 3, 1893, contains this passage. Upon questioning regarding the whereabouts of recent guests, the elder Hawkins Elijah maintained that all had departed days prior. When confronted with evidence of meals prepared that very morning, as indicated by warm cooking pots in the kitchen, he offered no explanation. The younger brother, Isaiah, remained silent throughout, though his gaze never left the locked cellar door whenever officers moved in that direction. When pressed about the cellar, Isaiah reportedly attempted to flee, while Elijah engaged in a physical confrontation with the sheriff. Both were subdued, though not before Deputy Michael Reardon sustained a severe knife wound to his shoulder inflicted by Isaiah, who had concealed a butcher's blade beneath his coat. The report notes that even after being restrained, Isaiah continued to struggle, attempting to prevent access to the cellar with such violence that 2 deputies were required to hold him, while Sheriff Thornton broke through the reinforced lock. What the authorities discovered beneath the lodging house has been described with deliberate vagueness in official documents. The cellar contained what Sheriff Thornton would only refer to as evidence of unspeakable acts, and remains inconsistent with conventional butchery. Deputy Samuel Wilson, the youngest of the group at 24 years of age, was reportedly so overcome by what he witnessed that he resigned his position immediately upon return to Winona, and, according to local accounts, never again spoke of what he had seen beneath the woodsman's rest. He left Shannon County within a month and reportedly relocated to Oregon, where he lived until his death in 1942, never returning to Missouri. A more detailed accounting comes from the medical examiner's report, sealed by court order until 1947 and now preserved in the state archives. Dr. Howard Jessup, who traveled from West Plains to examine the evidence, documented finding human remains in various stages of preparation, including portions of at least 4 individuals preserved in salt barrels, and bones showing evidence of precise butchery consistent with culinary intent rather than concealment of murder. The report continues in clinical detail. The cellar contained specialized equipment for processing human remains, including various knives of professional quality, saws modified for precision cutting, and custom hooks for suspending bodies during dismemberment. A large stone table, stained with blood of various ages, occupied the center of the space. Drainage channels had been cut into the stone, leading to collection vessels. These vessels contained what appears to be blood in various stages of coagulation, suggesting a deliberate collection process rather than incidental drainage. Perhaps most disturbing was Dr. Jessup's observation that the cellar had been meticulously organized with a separate area for preparation, preservation, and what appeared to be a specialized smoking chamber built into the earthen walls. This was not the work of frenzied madmen, he wrote, but rather the calculated operation of individuals who had refined their methods over considerable time. The precision of the cutting, the careful separation and preservation of specific portions, and the evident seasoning and preparation methods all indicate a systematic approach to the processing of human remains for consumption. The report also noted the discovery of clothing and personal effects belonging to multiple individuals, carefully sorted and stored in wooden crates. These items would later prove crucial in identifying some of the victims. Among them were Thomas Grayson's distinctive pocket watch and monogrammed handkerchief, Jacob Miller's hunting knife, and Frederick Walsh's Union membership card. Dr. Jessup estimated, based on the quantity of remains and personal effects, that at least 11 individuals had been processed in the cellar. Subsequent investigation revealed a disturbing pattern. The brothers had established similar operations twice before, once in Pennsylvania and once in Kentucky, both times preceding a series of disappearances that had gone largely uninvestigated. In Harlan County, Kentucky, local records showed that the brothers had operated a boarding house for coal miners from 1882 to 1884, during which time at least 9 men had gone missing. The establishment had burned to the ground under suspicious circumstances, after which the brothers had vanished from the area. This pattern was uncovered largely through the efforts of William Blackwood, who, following the brothers' arrest, undertook a thorough investigation of their background. Traveling to Kentucky and Pennsylvania, he pieced together a disturbing history of previous enterprises and associated disappearances. The brothers' methodology appears consistent across locations, he wrote in his final report to Jeremiah Grayson. They establish themselves in regions where transient workers are common, operate for approximately 2 years while building a reputation for exceptional hospitality and cuisine, then disappear following a suspicious fire that conveniently eliminates evidence. Similarly, in Luzerne County, Pennsylvania, a boarding house operated by 2 men matching the brothers' descriptions had been the last known location of several miners who disappeared between 1879 and 1881. No connection had been made at the time, as the men had used the surname Hawley rather than Hawkins. The establishment there, known as the Miners' Haven, had also been destroyed by fire shortly after local authorities began investigating the disappearances. Blackwood's investigation uncovered another disturbing detail. In each location, the brothers had established a reputation for serving uniquely flavorful meals before abruptly relocating. A newspaper clipping from the Wilkes-Barre Times, dated November 1880, mentions Hawley's boarding house as offering uncommonly fine stews that have become the talk of the mining community. Similar references appeared in the Harlan County Register regarding the brothers' Kentucky establishment. The physical evidence recovered from the cellar and surrounding property at the Woodsman's Rest included personal effects belonging to at least 11 individuals, including Thomas Grayson's pocket watch and distinctive boots, Jacob Miller's hunting knife with his initials carved into the handle, and Frederick Walsh's union card from the Timber Workers Association. More gruesome discoveries included a collection of 47 teeth extracted from various victims and preserved in a glass jar, and what appeared to be a ledger keeping track of yields from different specimens. This ledger, while less personal than Isaiah's journal, provides disturbing insight into the brothers' methodical approach. Entries categorized victims by physical characteristics, with notations regarding the quality and quantity of usable material obtained from each. Numerical codes, later determined to reference specific preparation methods, accompanied each entry. The ledger also contained calculations regarding the number of meals that could be prepared from each processing, suggesting a business-like approach to the entire operation. Authorities also discovered a journal reportedly kept by Isaiah Hawkins, though the contents were deemed too disturbing for public record and were sealed by court order. According to one deputy who spoke anonymously to the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, the journal contained recipes with coded references and observations on the quality of different ingredients. One entry reportedly read, "The woodsman yields the sweetest portions, particularly after winter cutting, when the muscles have been well used but the body carries no summer fever. The shoulders and upper legs provide the most substantial offerings, while the softer central organs require significant seasoning to mask their natural character." Other entries apparently detailed Isaiah's beliefs regarding the properties acquired through consuming human flesh. He wrote of absorbing the essence of the consumed and described specific methods of preparation intended to preserve the vital qualities of different individuals. These passages suggest a ritualistic or quasi-religious aspect to the brothers' activities, extending beyond mere pragmatic cannibalism into a more disturbing ideological framework. The journal also contained references to the brothers' childhood and upbringing, though these sections were heavily coded and difficult to interpret. What could be discerned suggested a family history marked by deprivation and isolation, with recurring references to lessons from grandfather regarding survival and the true nature of sustenance. These cryptic allusions have never been fully decoded, though they suggest the brothers' practices may have had roots in earlier family traditions. The search of the property extended beyond the main structure to include the stable, smokehouse, and surrounding woods. In a small clearing approximately 200 yards behind the main building, investigators discovered what Sheriff Thornton described as a disposal site, where bones that had been stripped of usable flesh were discarded. The accumulated remains suggested the operation had been ongoing for the entirety of the brothers' residence at the location, with layers of bones in various states of decomposition extending several feet into the ground. The trial of the Hawkins brothers began in June 1893 and lasted less than 3 days. Due to the notoriety of the case, it was moved to the county courthouse in Eminence, where a special session was convened. The evidence was presented to a jury of local men, many of whom had eaten at the Woodsman's Rest at some point. According to courtroom accounts published in the West Plains Gazette, several jurors were visibly affected when presented with evidence, with one man reportedly fainting when shown the contents of a preserved specimen jar. The prosecution, led by County Attorney Walter Harrison, presented a methodical case that focused primarily on the physical evidence recovered from the cellar. Dr. Jessup's testimony regarding the human remains formed the cornerstone of the case, supported by the identification of personal effects belonging to known missing persons. William Blackwood testified regarding his observations during his stay at the establishment and his subsequent investigation into the brothers' history and previous locations. The brothers remained silent throughout the proceedings, offering no defense or explanation. Their court-appointed attorney, Jeremiah Hayes, made only token objections and later admitted to the press that he had been unable to elicit any cooperation or contrition from his clients. According to Hayes's subsequent statement to the Springfield Republican, they sat through the entire proceedings with an unsettling calm, as if they were observers rather than participants. Not once did either man express remorse, denial, or indeed any emotion whatsoever regarding the charges against them. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all counts. Judge William Harrington sentenced them to death by hanging, carried out on August 12, 1893, in the courthouse yard. In his sentencing statement, preserved in court records, Judge Harrington described the brothers' crimes as exceeding in depravity anything previously encountered in the annals of this state's jurisprudence, and expressed his belief that no punishment available under our laws could adequately address the magnitude of your transgressions against human decency and divine law. The execution itself was a somber affair attended by families of the identified victims and a substantial crowd from surrounding counties. According to newspaper accounts, neither brother spoke any last words or showed any reaction when the sentence was read. The Springfield Republican reported that the brothers went to their deaths with the same silent stoicism that had characterized their trial, their expressions betraying neither remorse nor fear as the nooses were placed around their necks. A curious detail noted by several witnesses and reported in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch was that at the moment of execution, the brothers turned their heads to face one another. In that final instant, wrote reporter Martin Sullivan, some communication seemed to pass between them, not in words, but in that silent language that twins or lifelong companions sometimes develop. Whatever message was conveyed in that glance died with them, but those who observed it described feeling a chill, as if witnessing the conclusion of some pact or understanding beyond ordinary comprehension. What makes this case particularly haunting is not just the brothers' actions, but the community's unwitting participation in them. As one juror reportedly stated after the verdict, the most damnable thing is that they made us all complicit. We praise them for their cooking. God help us, we asked for more. This sentiment was echoed in letters to the editor published in several regional newspapers, with one correspondent from West Plains writing, "I cannot rid myself of the memory of dining at that accursed place last autumn and complimenting the proprietor on his fine stew. The thought of what I may have consumed haunts my every waking moment." The psychological impact on the community was profound and long-lasting. Many who had patronized the Woodsman's Rest reportedly suffered from nightmares, digestive disorders attributed to psychological distress, and what modern clinicians might recognize as symptoms of post-traumatic stress. Local physician Dr. Elias Monroe documented treating numerous patients for what he termed acute melancholia and nervous disturbance in the months following the brothers' execution, all tied to the realization of what they might have unknowingly consumed. In the aftermath, the Woodsman's Rest was burned to the ground by order of the county. Contemporary accounts describe how the flames rose unusually high with a strange coloration, attributed by some to the chemicals the brothers had used in their preservation processes. The site was deliberately left unmarked on subsequent maps, with county officials going so far as to reroute a planned logging road to avoid the location entirely. Shannon County records indicate that in September 1893, the county board passed a resolution declaring the property unfit for human habitation or use, and prohibited any future development on the site. The land was seized for unpaid taxes in 1895, but remained unsold, eventually being incorporated into what would later become part of the Mark Twain National Forest in the early 20th century. To this day, no structures have been built on the location where the Woodsman's Rest once stood. Local residents reportedly avoided the area for decades, claiming the ground itself had been poisoned. A geological survey team in 1937 noted that even 44 years later, no significant vegetation grew in the immediate vicinity of where the foundation had stood. Their report states, "The soil shows unusual characteristics inconsistent with the surrounding terrain, including a persistent alkalinity and lack of normal invertebrate presence. Local guides refused to approach within a quarter-mile of the site after sundown." The survey team's botanist, Dr. Lawrence Miller, collected soil samples from the site for analysis, noting in his field journal, "The absence of normal plant succession in this clearing is remarkable. While the surrounding forest shows healthy growth, the specific location where the structure reportedly stood remains nearly barren. What sparse vegetation does exist appears stunted and malformed." Local residents attribute this to the evil that occurred there, but there must be a scientific explanation, perhaps chemical contamination from the brothers' activities or the subsequent fire. Laboratory analysis of the soil samples revealed elevated levels of certain compounds consistent with the processing of organic matter, including unusual concentrations of calcium, phosphorus, and various nitrates. These findings suggest that the brothers' disposal of blood and other bodily fluids over an extended period may have fundamentally altered the soil chemistry, creating conditions inhospitable to normal plant growth. The report concludes, "While folk explanations involving curses or spiritual contamination are of course unfounded, there is a very real sense in which the ground has been poisoned by the activities that took place upon it." The case might have faded entirely from public memory if not for the discovery of Isaiah's journal during a reorganization of county evidence storage in 1954. While the journal itself remained sealed in the Missouri State Archives, its existence prompted renewed interest in the case. Dr. Eleanor Phillips, a criminal psychologist from Washington University, was granted limited access to the materials in 1962. Her subsequent paper, Ritualistic Patterns in the Hawkins Case, suggested that the brothers operated under an elaborate delusion, believing they were absorbing the strength of their victims by preparing and serving their remains to unwitting consumers. "The journal reveals a disturbing psychological framework," Phillips wrote. Isaiah Hawkins appears to have believed that by processing human flesh in specific ways and serving it to others, he was creating a cycle of power transference that would ultimately benefit himself and his brother. The detailed notes on preparation methods, the categorization of victims by occupation and physical characteristics, and the documented observations of diners' reactions all point to a ritualistic pattern that transcends mere homicidal impulse. Phillips noted that the journal contained references to the brothers' childhood and a disturbing family tradition that may have originated with their grandfather, who had reportedly survived the Donner Party incident decades earlier. According to Isaiah's writings, their grandfather had told them stories of how those who consumed the flesh of the strong became strong themselves, a belief he claimed had allowed him to survive the infamous winter in the Sierra Nevada. This connection, however, has never been definitively established and remains speculative. Phillips's analysis further suggested that the brothers operated under a complex shared delusion, with Elijah providing the social interface necessary to lure victims while Isaiah executed the more technical aspects of their operation. "The symbiotic relationship between the brothers," she wrote, "represents a rare case of folie à deux, in which the delusional system is not merely shared but operationalized through a division of labor that maximized their effectiveness." Elijah's charisma and social acuity complemented Isaiah's technical precision and ritualistic dedication, creating a uniquely dangerous partnership. What can be verified through census records is that the brothers were born to Jonathan and Mary Hawkins in western Pennsylvania around 1858 and 1860, respectively. Their fathers listed in the 1860 census as a butcher by trade who died under unspecified circumstances in 1868. Their mother remarried a man named Edward Graves in 1870, and the family relocated to Kentucky shortly thereafter. School records from Harlan County show both boys attended local education until approximately age 14, with teachers noting that Elijah displayed unusual intelligence and aptitude for figures, while Isaiah was described as withdrawn but methodical. A report from the Harlan County School Superintendent, dated 1873, contains a curious notation regarding Isaiah. The younger Hawkins boy displays concerning tendencies in his compositions, particularly those involving natural history. His descriptions of animal anatomy suggest an unhealthy fascination with internal structures and bodily functions. When questioned about these interests, he becomes guarded and uncommunicative. Recommend increased spiritual guidance and monitoring. Following their mother's death in 1878, the brothers disappear from official records until they emerge in Luzerne County, Pennsylvania in 1879, under the name Hawley. This gap in their history has led to speculation about what experiences might have shaped their development during this critical period. Some researchers have suggested they may have worked as butchers or slaughterhouse workers, acquiring skills they would later apply to their gruesome enterprise, though no employment records have been found to confirm this hypothesis. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the case is how completely it was absorbed into local folklore, transforming from documented history into cautionary tale. Parents in Shannon County reportedly warned misbehaving children well into the 1940s that the Hawkins brothers would put them in the stew pot if they strayed too far into the woods. The phrase, "gone to the Hawkins table," became regional shorthand for missing persons whose disappearances went uninvestigated. Oral histories collected by WPA workers in the 1930s document numerous variations of the story circulating throughout the Ozarks. In some tellings, the brothers possessed supernatural abilities or had made a pact with dark forces. One account, recorded from an elderly resident of Winona in 1937, claimed that the brothers could not be seen in mirrors and cast no shadows at noon. Another suggested that they had learned their practices from a Native American shaman who had shown them how to gain the strength of their enemies through ritual consumption. These folkloric embellishments reflect the community's struggle to comprehend such extreme depravity in rational terms. By attributing supernatural elements to the brothers, local residents could distance themselves from the more disturbing reality that the monsters had been ordinary men conducting their business in plain sight, and that the community had not only failed to recognize the danger, but had actively patronized and praised the brothers' establishment. The cultural impact extended beyond local folklore. In 1932, author Vance Randolph documented several variants of the story in his collection, Ozark Mountain Folklore, noting how elements had been embellished or altered in oral tradition. In some tellings, the brothers were said to possess supernatural abilities, including the power to lure travelers through hypnosis, or to appear as trusted friends until victims were inside their establishment. These embellishments, Randolph noted, served to distance the community from the more disturbing reality that the monsters had been ordinary men conducting their business in plain sight. Randolph wrote, "The transformation of historical events into supernatural tales serves a psychological purpose for the community. By reimagining the Hawkins brothers as something other than human, the stories allow listeners to preserve the belief that they would have recognized such evil had it truly been of this world. The alternative, that such depravity could exist undetected among them, proves too disturbing to confront directly." In 1958, a reporter for the Kansas City Star attempted to locate the site of the Woodsman's Rest for an anniversary piece on the case. There, he reported finding nothing but an unnatural depression in the earth where a foundation might once have been, and a strange absence of wildlife or birds, as if the place remained quarantined by nature itself. His guide, an 87-year-old former logger named Henry Parsons, refused to approach the clearing, stating only, "Some ground stays poisoned, no matter how many years pass." The reporter, Michael Donovan, wrote in his published account, "Standing in that silent clearing, surrounded by the otherwise vibrant forest, I experienced a profound sense of wrongness that defies rational explanation." Guided by elderly residents who claimed to remember the location, he was taken to a clearing in the dense forest near what is now the western edge of the Mark Twain National Forest. Nothing visibly distinguishes this patch of earth from the surrounding woodland, yet the absence of normal forest sounds, no birdsong, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush, creates an unnerving vacuum. Whether this is due to some physical property of the soil, as scientific explanations suggest, or something more intangible, as locals believe, the result is a place that feels fundamentally separate from the natural world around it. Donovan's article sparked renewed interest in the case, leading to several amateur investigations and unauthorized excavations at what was believed to be the site. In response, the U.S. Forest Service officially restricted access to the area in 1960, citing environmental concerns and historical preservation. This restriction remains in effect today, with the exact location omitted from public maps of the national forest. The physical records of the case, the court transcripts, evidence logs, and Isaiah's journal were transferred to the state archives in Jefferson City in 1965. Access remains restricted, with historians and researchers required to obtain special permission to view even the redacted materials. This restriction has only added to the case's mystique and has led to numerous unauthorized accounts and embellishments in popular culture. Dr. Martin Lowell, curator of criminal artifacts at the Missouri State Historical Society from 1972 to 1998, wrote in his memoir, "No case in our collection generates more requests for access than the Hawkins brothers' materials. There is something in the human psyche that seeks to understand the extremes of depravity, perhaps as a way of defining the boundaries of our own humanity. Yet, in my professional opinion, some knowledge serves no constructive purpose." The detailed methodologies documented in Isaiah Hawkins's journal would benefit no legitimate researcher. Lowell further noted that even among professional historians and criminologists, exposure to the complete case materials often had a profound psychological impact. I have observed distinguished academics, people who have studied the worst atrocities of human history, emerge from the Hawkins archives visibly shaken, he wrote. One professor of criminal psychology, after reviewing Isaiah's journal, canceled his remaining research appointments and returned to his university immediately. He later wrote to me that the material had given him nightmares for weeks afterward. What remains documented fact is that between October 1892 and February 1893, at least 15 men disappeared in the vicinity of the Hawkins brothers' establishment. Of these, only 11 were ever officially connected to the case through recovered personal effects. The actual number of victims may be considerably higher, given the transient nature of the logging workforce and the limited record-keeping of the era. A review of Missouri Timber Company payroll records conducted in 1965 revealed that as many as 23 employees had been marked as departed without notice from operations within a 30-mile radius of the Woodsman's Rest during the brothers' period of operation. Similarly, a comparison of census data from 1890 and 1900 shows an unusual decline in population for that specific region of Shannon County, though this could be attributed to multiple factors including the general economic depression of the 1890s. The broader implications of the case extend beyond the immediate tragedy of the victims. The Hawkins brothers operated during a period of significant social and economic transition in American history. The expanding frontier, the growth of extractive industries like logging and mining, and the increasing mobility of the workforce created conditions where transient individuals could disappear without raising immediate alarm. The brothers exploited these structural vulnerabilities, targeting those least likely to be missed or searched for. The forest has long since reclaimed the logging trails that once led to the Woodsman's Rest. The precise location has been deliberately omitted from modern maps, though local guides occasionally claim to know the site. Those who venture into the deeper reaches of the Ozarks even today report an uneasiness in certain clearings, places where the trees seem reluctant to grow and where an unnatural silence prevails. A park ranger interviewed for a regional history project in 1987 described one such location. There's a spot about 15 miles northeast of Winona that doesn't sit right. Wildlife avoids it. GPS equipment malfunctions there for no apparent reason. We don't mark it on public maps, and we certainly don't guide tourists anywhere near it. Some places deserve to be forgotten. In 1967, the last known person with first-hand connection to the case passed away, Martha Carver's daughter, who had been a young girl when her mother made those deliveries to the Hawkinses' establishment. With her died the last living memory of the brothers themselves. All that remains now are the documents, the folklore, and the enduring question of how such horrors could exist alongside everyday life, undetected until it was too late. Researchers have attempted to contextualize the Hawkins case within the broader pattern of American history. The 1890s were a period of significant transition, particularly in rural areas increasingly connected to urban centers through expanding rail networks and industrial demand for raw materials. The Ozarks, like many remote regions, existed in a liminal space, not fully integrated into modern systems of law enforcement and communication, yet no longer as isolated as they had been decades earlier. This transitional state created what criminologist Dr. Rebecca Stern has termed zones of diminished accountability, areas where traditional community oversight had weakened while formal legal structures had not yet fully established their authority. The Hawkins brothers, she wrote in a 2001 analysis, exploited precisely this type of jurisdictional and social ambiguity. They positioned themselves at the crossroads of civilization and wilderness, where questions were few and oversight was minimal. The case also reflects the particular vulnerabilities of working-class and transient populations in late 19th century America. The victims were primarily men without substantial family connections in the immediate area, whose disappearances could be easily attributed to the natural mobility of labor during that period. As labor historian Dr. Thomas Wilkins noted in his study of the case, the Hawkins brothers selected their victims from a class of workers whose absences would not trigger immediate investigation. The disposability of these individuals in the eyes of their employers and the broader society created the conditions that allowed the brothers to operate undetected for so long. The case of the Hawkins brothers serves as a grim reminder of the shadows that exist at the edges of civilization, not supernatural darkness, but the more terrifying prospect of human monstrosity operating just beyond the reach of accountability. In the isolated communities of the 19th century Ozarks, where distances were measured in days rather than miles, and communication remained limited, such shadows found fertile ground. Perhaps the most disturbing legacy of the case is the realization that it might not be unique. How many other remote establishments along wilderness trails harbored similar secrets? How many disappearances were dismissed as ordinary occurrences when they were anything but? These questions haunt historians and criminologists who study the case even today. In 1960, construction workers excavating for a highway expansion near the Kentucky-West Virginia border uncovered a collection of human remains beneath the foundation of an abandoned roadhouse that dated to the 1870s. While no direct connection to the Hawkins brothers was ever established, the methodical arrangement of the bones and evidence of culinary preparation led some researchers to speculate about a possible connection or even a wider network of similar practitioners. The brothers' history before their documented arrival in Pennsylvania remains unclear. Gaps in the historical record have led to speculation about their possible movements and activities during earlier periods. Some researchers have attempted to trace patterns of disappearances along likely travel routes between their known locations, though such efforts remain largely speculative in the absence of definitive evidence. As you travel through the Ozark Mountains with their serene beauty and seemingly timeless forests, remember that the landscape holds secrets. Some have been revealed, documented, and consigned to history. Others perhaps remain buried, both figuratively and literally, in the deep hollows and forgotten clearings where sunlight struggles to reach. The Hawkins brothers were hanged on that August morning in 1893, but the case itself refuses to die. It continues to resurface in academic journals, folklore collections, and the occasional late-night conversation among locals who still pass down the warnings of their grandparents. Be careful where you eat when traveling alone, and always be suspicious when meat is offered at too reasonable a price in places far from established butchers. In the words of Sheriff Thornton, written in his final report before he resigned his position and reportedly left the state, some evils once witnessed cannot be unwatched. Some knowledge once gained cannot be surrendered. What we found beneath that lodging house has followed each of us like a shadow that grows no shorter with the passing of the sun. Those shadows continue to stretch across more than a century, reaching into our present with a simple, terrible truth. The monsters of our worst nightmares have always walked among us, wearing human faces and speaking with human voices. James Renfield, who gained access to the restricted materials in 1962 for his landmark study, Patterns of Predation, Serial Murder in Rural America. Renfield's conclusion remains perhaps the most succinct summation of the case's significance. The Hawkins brothers represent not an aberration from human nature, but rather an extreme manifestation of tendencies that exist in attenuated form throughout society: the capacity for deception, the commodification of human life, and the ability to compartmentalize morality when it serves one's interests. The brothers are long dead, but the fear they represent, the fear of what hides behind the hospitable smile and the generous plate, remains very much alive. The most comprehensive modern analysis of the case came from criminologist Dr. Their methods were exceptional, but the underlying psychology exists on a spectrum that includes far more ordinary forms of exploitation and deception. In a particularly insightful passage, Renfield draws connections between the brothers' methodology and broader societal structures. The Hawkins operation functioned as a microcosm of industrial practices common to their era. They selected raw materials, victims, based on utility and lack of social connection, processed these materials through specialized techniques, and distributed the resulting product to consumers unaware of its origins. This mirrors the increasing distance between production and consumption that characterized the Industrial Revolution, a distance that often obscured morally questionable practices behind palatable final products. This analysis suggests that the horror of the Hawkins case lies not merely in its gruesome details, but in its uncomfortable parallels to legitimate social and economic arrangements. By treating human beings as commodities to be processed and consumed, the brothers enacted an extreme version of tendencies present in more acceptable forms throughout society. This perspective may explain why the case continues to disturb modern audiences. It reflects distorted versions of familiar patterns rather than wholly alien behaviors. Occasional reports of similar cases have emerged in the decades since, though none with the same methodical organization or duration as the Hawkins operation. In 1931, authorities in rural Arkansas discovered a reclusive butcher who had allegedly served human meat to customers, though the evidence was largely circumstantial. More recently, in 1969, A remote hunting lodge in northern Michigan was investigated following the disappearance of several tourists, though no charges were ever filed due to insufficient evidence. As this account draws to a close, consider that the next time you travel through remote countryside, stopping at some isolated establishment for refreshment or rest, you're engaging in an act of profound trust. Most such trust is rewarded with nothing more sinister than overpriced coffee or mediocre food. But the case of the Hawkins brothers reminds us that occasionally, rarely, such trust can lead unwary travelers to a place like the Woodsman's Rest, where the welcome is warm, the food is suspiciously delicious, and some guests check out in ways they never anticipated. The final word on the case might best be left to William Blackwood, whose intervention brought the brothers to justice. In his last known correspondence, a letter to Jeremiah Grayson, dated 1912, shortly before his death, he wrote, "Nearly 20 years have passed since I encountered the Hawkins brothers, yet I find no distance of time diminishes the horror of what I witnessed. I have spent my remaining years attempting to understand how human beings could devise and execute such a scheme. Yet I remain as baffled now as I was then. Perhaps the most disturbing realization is not that such monsters exist, but that they walk among us wearing the faces of ordinary men, and we lack the capacity to recognize them until it is too late. That knowledge has been my constant companion and my enduring burden."